CBS News political director and Face the Nation moderator John Dickerson is in Washington. Good morning.
Good morning, Charlie.
So how did the president come to this decision about Rex Tillerson? And in the end, does Rex Tillerson have ideas about how the United States should strategically look at the world?
Well, I think he has ideas. The question is whether those ideas sync up with the ideas that Donald Trump has. And obviously, specifically with respect to Russia, it's really interesting, the relationship. I mean, there are some people who believe the relationship with Russia and the United States is in as bad a place as it has been since the early 1960s. But the world is different than the 1960s, and the United States is in a conflict position with Russia in some places, watching what it's doing with Baltic nations, for example, but also needs Russia to counterbalance a growing China. So the complexity of the Russian relationship will be a fascinating case to figure out where Donald Trump begins and ends and where his Secretary of State begins and ends. In terms of the choice, it looks like Donald Trump wanted somebody who was like what he said in the campaign, a CEO who made deals, somebody who had a kind of strong sense of himself and would be able to do America's bidding overseas. And I think also Donald Trump really did want Mitt Romney for a while and just couldn't get over the obstacles.
Right.
So do you expect a difficult confirmation process? You've got Senators Rubio, Lindsey Graham, John McCain have all raised concerns about his ties to Russia. I
think you will see a difficult process, in part because they'll be trying to figure out what exactly Donald Trump believes about Russia, and then where the Secretary of State or the incoming or the named Secretary of State, what he thinks about Russia. As John McCain said on Sunday on Face the Nation, it's sort of the first question is, what do you think of Vladimir Putin? And John McCain thinks he's a murderer and a thug. Yeah. Donald Trump has been very generous in the way he's treated Vladimir Putin. And, foreign policy people think unless you can get that first question right, all the policy decisions you make after that may be wrong.
Well, can't you think of somebody as a murderer and a thug and still understand that they're the leader of a country and you have to deal with them, and therefore, you want to bring qualities that will enable you to assess him better?
Absolutely, and that's the argument Democrats made for dealing with countries that Republicans didn't ever even want to talk to. Is they said, look, Ronald Reagan dealt with the Russians and his eyes were wide open. The question is whether you operate with the person you may think is a murderer and a thug from a position of strength or in a supine position that essentially lets them do their bidding. And that's not just important in terms of what Russia wants in the world, but all the other nations that will react if they think the United States is not really in the game in terms of checking Russian power.
John, Donald Trump had said he would hold a press conference on Thursday about how he would disconnect himself from any potential conflicts of interest with his business. He's now postponed that press conference, saying that the lawyers are just not ready. What are the implications?
Well, the implications is that this big question still is out there. And if it's so complex that the lawyers just aren't ready, then it seems that it puts more focus on those tax returns. In other words, what's the real picture of Donald Trump's interests and how will those intersect with his presidency? There's no way to know. It's apparently quite complicated. There's really no way to know unless you look at the actual underlying documents that would suggest that. There's no evidence at the moment that Donald Trump is hastening to release those returns. So whatever promises he made, and there's a new one about his sons will run the company and they won't get in any new deals. That's a big step, but it really doesn't mean anything unless they really sort of show their work, and have some transparency.
Yeah, and how likely do you think it is, John, that we'll ever see the tax returns?
Well, based on the promises that were made during the campaign and the ones that weren't fulfilled on the tax returns, you'd have to be skeptical. But it's really only until it's kind of all laid out there for the American people that people can be certain that these conflicts that have been so much talked about are really taken care of.
John Dickerson, always good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nora.